What's up everybody, Brett here, my YouTube channel Good Talk Gaming. Going to be bringing you in for some patch notes here for Total War Warhammer 2's new DLC, the Vampire Coast. Super excited for this. I've been waiting for this for a long time. A lot of you out there, if you're watching this now, you've probably been waiting for this as well, just as long as I have. And we're going to go through some of the patch notes. We're going to ignore the massive amount of bug fixes and some of these lists. It would take like an hour just to get through the bug fixes alone for me to read that to you guys. But let's go through, and I can read a bit here. Some of this stuff, if you're like me and you've been reading the Reddits and keeping up to date with the news, none of this will be new to you. All this top part here. Vampire Coast is launching. We're getting new vampire accounts mechanics, the bloodlines. These have already been shown to us. You can unlock, and I can just read this here. It's probably more succinct for me to read what they wrote. Vampire accounts factions in Mortal Empires can now awaken powerful lords of the 5 ancient vampire bloodlines: the Lamians, the Von Karsteins, the Blood Dragons, the Necrarchs, and the Strigoi. So, using Blood Kisses, a new type of currency for the vampire accounts, you can recruit these guys. They have special abilities that work with your factions, and they're super powerful. So I'm looking forward to doing a campaign involving those in kind of my free time. Heinrich Himmler gets his own faction. He gets a Barded Nightmare. They're making a big deal about him getting an armored horse, which is fine. He needed the mobility to be competitive, that's for sure. But him getting his own faction is great, and we'll go into kind of where that's positioned and why that's important as we go through the more specifics of the updates. So also big news, like I said, the free LC is going to be Lokir Felhart. Awesome, and this has been kind of publicly known information for a while. I'm not going to dig too deep into this. Essentially, he's a Corsair themed Dark Elf Lord who can ride eventually a powerful dragon named Maelstrom. He really powerful on Foot Lord. He has lots of buffs for the Corsair units as well as the Charybdis. And his big deal is he can get black arcs without using the right. He can, for every major port he captures, he gets a black arc that he can recruit. So, very powerful, very fun, and he's in a very crowded starting location, so he should be a lot of fun on the campaign map. So here, Heinrich Himmler start position change. He's going to be in a place called Blackstone Post in Mortal Empires. His new faction is the Barrow Legion, and he's going to be gone from the Vampire Accounts faction. So all worth knowing, and his army is immune to non-vampire territory attrition. So that's big. That lets him roam around the map and get into places where vampire accounts would struggle to without suffering major attrition. Let's see here. So this is kind of big news and was exciting to a lot of people. The campaign map changes. They added the Heart of the Jungle province and the Bowmen of Orion AI faction to the Mortal Empires campaign. They're all the way down south, and people are speculating about, possible start position for future Wood Elf Lords. And I'm not sure if that's happening, but at the moment it's wonderful to see them just because in Mortal Empires they will be a nice unit diversity for the Lords that do start in that position. Same thing with the Land of the Dervishes and Sudenburg. So now you're going to be able to fight AI Empire factions in the Mortal Empires campaign, as well as the Wood Elves down south. And they did a little bit of readjustment to add Lokir Felhart's Isle, as well as the Galleon's Graveyard, which is where Noctilus starts. So the new legendary Lord Noctilus starts. They created quite a few islands for this DLC, and that's what they're talking about here, to give some starting positions to the new lords. Let's see here, as we scroll down here, I just want to get you guys the important stuff. I don't want this video to be 2 hours long. They changed up how the UI is going to look. That's fine with me. I like the way it was in the first and Total War Warhammer 1, and wasn't a big fan of the changes to the UI in the second game, but I think it's fine. So here, this is kind of important. Some people have spoiled this already. There are a lot of other YouTubers who have early access. I'm unfortunately a small channel. I didn't have early access. So I've been following the news just like the rest of you guys. And this is something that has been spoiled, but I think it's very important that we go through it because it will affect all of your campaign playthroughs. And for me, that's a huge part of what I care about in these games. So High Elves, Tyrion, faction trait, plus 30% diplomacy with High Elf factions, that's new. Minus 100% build time on Shrine of Cain building chain, that's new as well and much needed. The Shrine of Cain, the island that it's on, is not suitable for settling for the High Elves. So to build the Shrine of Cain took something ridiculous like 18 turns or something like that. So bringing it down to a manageable figure for Tyrion makes sense, considering he is the heir of Anarion, and that sword is kind of his by right, and the lore is always tempting him. Also, giving him +3 recruit rank for Lothern Seaguard is also pretty sweet. It's only a Lord ability, so it doesn't apply to his entire faction, but it does make sense that he is the Lord of Lothern, and that he can get higher ranked Lothern Seaguard. Amazing unit in the campaign. Let's get into the Dark Elves here. Marathi, faction change, 50% minus 50% upkeep for heroes and hero action costs. Change just from minus 50% hero action cost. So lowering the upkeep, you can get tons of witch elves, tons of assassins, and you can make some really cool hero-based armies, and just have a lot of kind of insurgent heroes across the map doing actions for very cheap. And minus 25% construction cost for sorcery buildings. So move from the Lord effect to the faction effect, which makes way more sense. It did make sense as a Lord effect. A lot of these are just going to be them being put in their proper place. And for the most part, I have read through these. The site was down for like an hour and a half or something. So I had a chance to read through. Someone saved a lot of this. So I read most of this already, but I haven't read all the unit changes, which is what I'm like dying to get into. So for the most part, all of these are buffs. So don't be scared that they've nerfed your favorite lord. Here we go. Tretch for the Skaven, plus 13 melee attack during ambushes. Move from faction to lord effect. So this is actually a bit of a nerf. And plus 13 melee attack after retreating. So this is going to be just for Tretch. It's not going to be to all of his armies. So this is a bit of a nerf. So as soon as I say they're mostly not nerfs, we get a bit of a nerf here. But for the most part, they are bonuses. So Skarsnik, a Lord effect, plus 14 charge bonus to Night Goblin Squig Hoppers. So that's a nice bonus for those guys. Gives you a reason to use them in the late game instead of Orc Cavalry, which I like. I like this a lot. They're some of my favorite units in the game. So Vampire Counts, faction traits, suitable climate mountains, new. So he can settle in places normal vampire counts might find difficult. Plus 30 diplomacy with Beastmen and Warriors of Chaos. So he's much more chaos focused, and that goes into his lore, which I'm not going to go in too deep. But he does make a pact with the Chaos Gods, and his champion is Krell, the undead chaos, like scary, not quite an Everchosen, I don't believe he was, but he was a powerful Chaos Lord who died and was raised in undeath. And that's kind of Heinrich Himmler's champion, and his best trait possibly as a Lord is the fact that he can summon Krell to fight. So minus 25% raised dead cost has been removed. That's a bit of a nerf, but I think that's been compensated for sure. Minus 50% upkeep for Necromancers, up from 25%. So that's nice. You can get multiple Necromancers in stacks and use them as, you know, backup heroes in those stacks, or just straight up mana batteries if that's what you want to do. Something a lot of people do in multiplayer as well. But having this trait removed, I think Raised Dead is going to be a much more effective tool in the campaigns now. So this minus 25% cost might not have been necessary. And they added new talents as well. Not talents. That's not what I'm looking for. New tech for the vampire counts. And that tech is going to make zombie skeletons in the lower chaff units, which I think this bonus was intended to apply to Heinrich. They have talents now that make them completely free. Zombies are free, and I think Heinrich has a new talent as well that gives his zombies in his army regen as long as they're in combat, I believe. So that's super strong. Helman Gorst here, faction trait, 30% research, up from 10%. That's huge. That's very tempting to take him just for the increase in research. +3 corpse cart recruit rank, that's okay. Charge bonus to the corpse cart. I don't think this is applicable to the weaker corpse carts, the first 3 iterations. I think if this applies to the Mortis engines, then this is fine, because Mortis engines do get a lot of kills in most battles. I'm not sure if that applies to them though. But I could see having a run here with Helm and Gorst, in addition to, with your first Blood Kiss, getting a Necrarch, one of the special new Bloodline Lords, and getting a plus 25% bonus to your research rate. So right off the bat, you could have a potential plus 55% research rate, which is huge because the Vampire Accounts tech tree is very difficult to get through, even on a long playthrough. It takes a long time. So his Lord effect, all of his units in his armies get poison attacks, which is very strong. Having skeletons do poison damage in the early game is pretty overwhelming for most early game armies. Isabella von Karstein, she gets a Blood Kiss. Good, makes sense. And her Lord trait, Undying Love, plus 15% melee attack and defense when Vlad and Isabella reinforce each other, moved to their Lord effects. Makes sense. Manfred von Karstein, he gets more movement range, 10%. And he gets higher recruit rank on the Graveguard and Black Knights. Makes sense. It's kind of his deal. And minus 15% upkeep for Graveguard. Good. Another 5%. And he gets a Blood Kiss as well. Plus 30 Winds of Magic Reserves. Wow. Yeah, Manfred is definitely the caster king in this game. Everything he gets is just super synergistic with him having like nearly infinite winds of magic. You can cast from start to finish of most battles. Plus 10 leadership versus men, so that's good. That'll help him conquer most of the Empire provinces early game. So we have Vlad von Karstein now. More movement range, also good. Blood Kiss, of course. So he gets plus 30 diplomacy with Ark the Black. All Vampire Counts and Vampire Coast factions. I like that. So if you start as Vlad, it should be easier to confederate with Manfred, with Helm Gorst and Heinrich. You should be able to get those guys easier. Now, of course, you can't confederate with the Vampire Coast or Ark the Black, but you can form some sort of undead alliance. It's very thematic. I like that a lot. And then the same thing as Isabella there. So Norska, we get into Throg. So under a faction trait, all of his armies get this. 15% physical resistance for trolls, up from 10%. So that's good. Another 5% physical resistance. And minus 20% upkeep for trolls, up from 15%. So just even more troll-heavy utility there from Throg. I like it. The ice trolls for the Norscan faction are very strong, and rocking like 6 of them in a late-game army, they're very overwhelming with their frostbite and with the high leadership and stats that Throg is able to give them. They're just world beaters. So here we have Wulfric, minus 15% upkeep for Marauders, up from 10%. Very good. So when I think of Marauders, I always think of the super low tier Chaos infantry. But in the Norsca faction, Marauders goes all the way up to their champions. So minus 15% upkeep for champion units, you know, with their much higher upkeep in the 400 range or so. This bonus starts to become quite meaningful at 15%. And higher reinforcement range. I like that. 30% reinforcement range. That's just a straight up 10% buff. And yeah, allows you to travel in packs. You know, once you're able to confederate Throg, if that's your goal of your playthrough, Wulfric and Throg can kind of roll together, and you'll be able to reinforce him from a good distance with Wulfric. So Bretonnia here, Alberic. I do not see anything about him getting his trident. That hurts a little bit. He just looks like a completely generic lord at this point. Hopefully one day they do give him his trident of Manon. Let's see, -1 recruitment time for cavalry. That's new and that's amazing. So he'll be able to get 1 turn. I think that's 1 turn Knights of the Realm. Probably still 2 turn Grail Knights and Questing Knights, if I remember correctly. But 1 turn Knights Errant, 1 turn Knights of the Realm is awesome. So plus 25% income from trade. That's huge. So an increase to 20% from where it was. So you're going to want to be trading all day And Albric was already kind of the money faction of the Bretonnians, so just an increase to that. And plus 10 melee defense for Knights of the Realm, up from 5, and that's just a special lore trait for him, not a faction-wide buff. So Lewin Leoncourt, plus 50% aura size, all characters when attacking, up from 20%. So he gives better leadership aura when he's attacking. And his lore trait, let's see, plus 8 melee attack versus enemies of the lady. So this is new. And plus 12 leadership versus enemies of the lady. And I think that's enemies of the lady is referring to certain races in the game that are quote unquote, evil races. And he gives these big bonuses to his army. So that's awesome. Let's get into the Empire. Changes across the board. That's nice to see. Some of these lords aren't mentioned because they didn't get any changes. So if we're mentioning them, it's because they got changes. Balthazar Gelt, minus 50% upkeep reduction for battle wizards, up from 25%. That's good. I always thought the 25% was a bit useless. I like to have one wizard in every army that I have as the Empire. In the late game, I'd have, 7, 8 armies. So it was something, but 50% is something you will actually notice throughout the game as you get more and more wizards. Plus 2 wizard agent cap, up from 1. This is also great. It'll allow you to use wizards as more of an agent and less as a hero in battle. Good change. Minus 20% Winds of Magic cost. I'm guessing that just applies statically to all spells, and that's specifically for Balthazar Gelt. So that's pretty sweet. And plus 10% artillery missile damage. That's huge as well. I like to roll very thematically with Balthazar Gelt, giving him lots of artillery, lots of gunpowder, and heavy metal greatswords up in the front. So he does still increase armor. These aren't all their buffs, they're just the ones that have been changed. So he does still give like his faction-wide armor buff, but he's also buffing artillery now. So, and he has an decrease to Winds of Magic cost for his spells. So very thematic buffs for Balthazar. Wider grill, no less chill. Okay, got it. So Karl Franz here. Franz, they will obey. So plus 10% movement range, up from 5. Just general buffs to all of these vanilla faction lords, and I like it, bringing them more in line with the power creep that's happening with all of these newer lords. Minus 15% Reichsguard and Great Guard upkeep, or Great Sword upkeep rather, up from 10%. I like that change as well. This is also how I like to play Karl Franz. I like to make sure he has Reichsguard instead of just ditching them all completely late game for the Demigryph Knights. And that's because Karl Franz does get buffs specifically to Reichsguard, giving them just increased stats, but also a bonus versus large, if I remember correctly, making them nearly as good when buffed as Demigryph Knights, or if not better actually, once you have all of those buffs in place. So I like to keep it thematic. Plus 30 diplomacy with Empire factions, up from 10. That's huge. That's going to make it much easier to confederate with him, and I think that was really necessary. I did a Empire playthrough not that long ago, one of my favorite factions to do that with. And some factions, as much as they like you, it takes forever to get them to confederate. And in Total War Warhammer 1, it was much, much easier, and I find it quite difficult in Total War Warhammer 2. I don't know if the algorithms have been changed somewhat, but you could have factions that absolutely love you, you're as strong as can be, and they just won't confederate with you no matter what. Even if they're threatened, they're about to lose their lord, they're about to lose their final, settlement, they still will not confederate with you. And I don't know if that's working as intended, but this is a welcome change because it'll allow you to get to that higher diplomacy much quicker and perhaps confederate at a much earlier place in the game, giving you more territory, allowing you to snowball. So way better leadership as a lore trait. So it makes sense. He's the emperor. His troops should have really high leadership to the point of nearly being unbreakable whenever he's on the field and doing fine. Volkmar, faction trait, minus 30% upkeep for flagellants, up from 15%. That's huge. You could field lots of large flagellant-based armies with your unbreakable flagellant line. I could see that being very thematic and very cool. Plus 20% ancillary drop chance, up from 10%. So you can get more magic items and things from any battle. It is a faction trait, so that's nice. And let's see here. So these are huge for Volkmar. Plus 30% casualty replenishment for flagellants. So him being the head of the Cult of Sigmar, he can just continuously get more flagellants. 12% physical resistance is huge for them, and plus 14 melee defense. So these guys are going to be just absolute tar pits, and with the buffs that he already has for them, you can give them a lot more damage as well. So, you know, they probably still won't be very good against Chosen or anything super heavily armored like that, but against all low and mid-tier units, they'll just be meat grinders who won't die. And you get them down to 5 or 10 models by the end of a fight, and they'll just come right back with this high replenishment rate. I love it. So here we go, Grim Gore. 10% movement range up from 5%, minus 15% upkeep for Black Orcs up from 10%, and that is a faction-wide buff. So his Lord buffs, 12% leadership to Black Orcs up from 6, that's nice. Plus 10 armor for Black Orcs up from 5, that's huge as well. And plus 30% post-battle loot, that's new, and that's great because if I remember Azag's buffs, this is going to keep them kind of at parity as to how much gold you can generate. Getting all this gold from loot over the course of a long game, 30% is quite a substantial buff. And full stacks of Black Orcs with Grimgar are going to be quite scary. Alright, let's check out Azag here. Faction buffs, plus 25% sacking income up from 10%, nice. Plus 25% research. These are both huge changes. Just giving him that much more research is good. Unfortunately though, for the greenskins, oh, and this is where this might play in as well. Let me finish reading this first. So minus 1 construction time and 25%, minus 25% construction cost for settlements. So buildings are cheaper, they construct faster. Excellent. So the reason why this is important with the research is that the greenskins are unique amongst most factions in that they're only allowed to research once they build the workshop. I want to say it's a tier 3 building for the greenskins. It gives them artillery, and it can take a while to get there. There are a lot of other buildings that you need to prioritize. So with the increased gold from his sacking, the increased or the decreased cost and the decreased construction time will allow you to get to this research much faster. And 25% research is this stat is basically useless until you unlock that. So having a buff to it is nice because once you get it, you really want to start rolling with that. And him having a 75% larger aura size, up from 15%, is wonderful because once he's up on his wyvern mount in the air, you're going to want him to be mobile, and you still want to have most of your army inside of his leadership aura, getting that leadership buff. Wurzag, minus 50% recruit cost for Savage Orcs, new. He's been bugged for a long time. When you confederate him, it still shows that they are more expensive. I hope that's something that they finally changed. We'll see. So, dwarves here, Thorgrim. Minus 25% military recruitment building cost, up from 10%. Nice buff. Plus 3 recruit rank for hammers, up from 1. 1 is basically nothing. 3 is substantial. You're going to notice the increased stats on a tier 3 recruit. Plus 30 diplomacy with dwarfs, new. This is amazing. Before, Grombrindle was definitely the guy you wanted to start with if you wanted to confederate very quickly as the dwarves. And they need this buff because at the moment, the greenskins Wa mechanic is, I'm not going to say it's broken, but it's a little oppressive for the dwarves. And what once was a very easy start, you can very quickly find yourself swarmed by full stacks, multiple full stacks of orcs, around turn 10 if you're not careful. So allowing him to confederate much easier is nice. Minus 15% upkeep for hammers and longbeards, up from 10%, and that is a faction effect. So I don't know how many hammers you're going to get even into the late game, but you do want longbeards in almost all of your armies. So having them be 15% cheaper is great. And he also has the increased aura size. Makes sense, he's the High King. He should have a huge leadership aura. Same way as Karl Franz buffs his guys. Same thing. So Ungrim here. Minus 50% Slayer recruitment, up from 25%. I like that a lot. That'll help you out in the early game specifically when you're just trying to get that first big stack of Slayers. And minus 75% construction cost for Slayer and landmark buildings. So I like that a lot. Once again, just focused around making your early game cheaper and easier and allowing you to get rolling much faster on Ungrim. And plus 10 melee attack for Slayers, up from 6. I like that. That's his Lord effect. Plus 30% casualty replenishment. That's really good. It's necessary for him. The same way that Volkmar gets the buff for Flagellants. Flagellants and Slayers, in terms of campaign and the way they play, they often end up the same way. They're units that are meant to get down to low model count, but that sucks for them because then they don't replenish, and it takes forever for you to get back to a full stack of Slayers. So minus 25% upkeep for Slayers has been moved from faction effects. Okay, so all of your lords don't have it, only Ungrim. That makes sense as well. He is the Slayer King. He should have the minus 25% upkeep. So here we go. Belegar, plus 10% leadership versus Skaven and Greenskins. I like that. And plus 30% tunnel evasion chance removed. Okay. He kind of needed some tunnel evasion just because a lot of times you could find yourself stranded and cut off from your buildings in your runs, trying to hurry up and get to Kara 8 Peaks. So having the ability to dodge people in the tunnel stance was certainly beneficial. So this is a bit of a nerf for sure. Grombrindle, see faction, plus 60% tunnel evasion chance, up from 40. So he gets it, but not Belegar. Plus 20% weapon strength, all units versus elves. Okay, so he won War of the Beard 2.0. Grombrindle coming in with a huge plus 20% weapon strength. So you want to go out and kill some elves when you're playing as Grombrindle. That makes sense. Grombrindle's lore is that he's super ancient. He's an ancient dwarven king, essentially, and one of the ancestors. And he hates the elves. Long story short, very, very long story short. So Lord effects, plus 10 army leadership, new, awesome. His army, dwarves are already pretty hard to break, so plus 10 army leadership for them means they're pushing into the unbreakable leadership territory. And plus 50% reinforcement range, up from 30%. Thematically, this makes sense with Grombrindle. He's kind of a hero of the dwarven people. He always shows up when they need him the most. So having him able to reinforce from a pretty big distance makes a lot of sense thematically with Grombrindle. So I like that change too. Chaos here, Archaon. Faction buff, plus 10 Chaos Warrior leadership, up from 5. Minus 30% recruit cost for Chaos Warriors, up from 15%. Minus 30 diplomacy with all factions, up from 20. So everyone will hate you when you play as Archaon, but they're supposed to. You are the Ever-Chosen. And Lord, plus 50% raise income, up from 25%. Nice, another bigger source of income. And plus 5% ward save for all units. So they took away this ability here, and now all your units from the very start of the campaign will have a 5% ward save. So even your low tier Marauders early game are going to have plus 5% ward save, which is nice. And I have to say that I did an Archaon gameplay not that long ago, campaign gameplay that is, and I tried to make him all about these Chaos Warriors because he gets so many special buffs for them, as well as his talents. But by the time I was leveled up to the point where I could get all those sweet buffs for the Chaos Warriors, I was already able to basically field a full stack of Chosen. So yeah, that felt a little bad for me, and I ended up feeling like I wasted a lot of my talent points buffing up those Chaos Warriors because they'll just never be as strong as Chosen. And once you get into the mid game, if you prioritize growth buildings and certain things, the Chaos Warriors really do fall off in terms of their effectiveness. It is nice to keep nice cheap stacks of Chaos Warriors on Archaon, but it never feels great to have your backup Sigvald or Kolek stack have all the Chosen and the Dragon Ogres and things like that, while Archaon is just rolling around with some Chaos Warriors. So just thought I'd give you that little bit of information. Some of these things are buffs, but they may not necessarily be super useful buffs. in an actual implementation. So Kolek Sun Eater here, +4 Chaos Corruption, that seems good, and minus 60% recruitment cost for Dragon Ogres, so another 10% recruitment cost reduction, that's fine. Minus 30 upkeep for Dragon Ogres, change from minus 30% recruit cost, okay. And plus 8 speed Elven units removed. I don't know what this was supposed to be, but it's quite confusing to me. I'm going to skip past that. Maybe you know what this is and I don't, but we're going to go on to Sigvald here. So plus 15 armor for lords and embedded heroes, up from 10, that's fine. Plus 15 leadership versus men, up from 5. So he's going to be good at taking out Empire factions. Let's see. So Lord, plus 3 horde growth, good. It's going to allow you to get up to the higher tier units much faster. Minus 60% Marauder upkeep. It's a Lord. If this was a faction trait, it would be great. Your auxiliary armies having much cheaper Marauders. But because you're growing so fast with horde growth, yeah, plus 3 Marauder recruit rank, you're going to outpace the need for Marauders in your army very quickly. Yeah, I don't think in any of my Chaos playthroughs did I ever need to stick with Marauders past honestly past turn 20. I think I'm already into Chaos Warriors, Aspiring Champions, you know, just better, just all around better units. So I don't quite like these changes. I don't think they're very useful. The Wood Elves here, Durthu, plus 10 charge bonus for Dryades, Treekin, and Treemen. Good, making them a bit more offensive, and minus 30% upkeep for these guys. So I like that a lot. So Durthu is going to be very thematic with his tree brethren, and they're going to be much more aggressive when they charge in. I like that. Orion faction, minus 15% upkeep for all cavalry. Change from just the Wood Elf or the Wildwood Riders. So this is awesome, and it's a faction buff, so all of your Wood Elf armies, you can spam cavalry for 15% cheaper. And his effects, more weapon strength, more charge bonus for those Wild Rider units. Very thematic. He is the Lord of the Wild Hunt, so it makes sense that the Wild Riders who would accompany him are also cheaper and better. And we're near the end of this part, guys, so stick with me. This is going to be a long video. Hopefully these are the changes you want to see, so you have no problem watching me go through my thought process as I read these. Beastman, Khazrak, plus 40% raid bonus, up from 10%. Khazrak had some of the most pitiful buffs in the game, so seeing any improvement to him is great. Plus 10 leadership versus men, up from 5. That's good. He fights a lot of men in his starting provinces, so this will pretty much always be relevant in the early game. So his Lord effects, minus 30% upkeep for Bestigors. That was up from something ridiculously bad, like 4%. Just completely useless. And I chalked that up to this being the first DLC they ever did, the Beastman. But minus 30% for the Bestigors, plus 3 recruitment rank for Bestigors, and minus 50% recruit cost, up from 30%. Means he is the Bestigor Lord. You can put full stacks of those guys on Khazrak and get them at rank 3, and you'll be able to start steamrolling there. It never made sense that Bestigors were so expensive, they took so long to recruit, and their stats used to be so mediocre, and his buffs were just like non-existent. Malagor, plus 2 Brace Shaman cap, up from 1, so you can get an extra Brace Shaman, that's nice. Plus 30 Diplomacy with Beastmen. If you want to confederate other Beastmen, you can with Malagor, up from 20. And plus 2 Horde growth, that's new, and that's very strong. That'll allow him to build his Horde faster and get you to those higher tier units. Plus 3 Brace Shaman recruit rank, up from 1. Minus 8 enemy replenishment, local province, that's new. So he debuffs the provinces in. Minus 8 enemy leadership is super strong. So wherever he goes, the Crowfather, Malagor, goes, the enemy armies that he fights are just going to be super nerfed with their leadership. And I also want to say he has an ability in his talent tree that stacks with this. So yeah, medium and low tier leadership factions will have trouble standing and fighting against Malagor on the campaign map. Morgar here, plus 30% upkeep for Minotaurs down from 40%. I think that's nice. You don't want to, it's never good in a game to limit how people play completely. So 40% felt oppressive and 30% not so much. And they did this because Mogr is the Chaos Spawn Lord, so minus 30% upkeep for Chaos Spawn down from 40%. And a lot of people love to spam Minotaurs, but you shouldn't really be telling people you can't spam Minotaurs. It's their playthrough, they can do it if they want. But this is very thematic, 30%, but it's not oppressive, which it felt like at 40%. So plus 3 Chaos Corruption spread up from 2, just a bit more. He is like walking Chaos Corruption, so it makes sense. And plus 12% Chaos Territory Attrition, up from 8%. Plus 8 Spawn melee defense, so that's nice. He buffs his Chaos Spawn. They'll be able to stay in the fight longer with more melee defense. And plus 20% missile resistance, so that's huge as well. So just some tankier Chaos Spawn for him, making it worth it. I like that. So here, let's see real quick where we're getting into. Okay, so Vampire count changes. They move the White King to a level 2 building. You'll be able to get them much faster, and they'll be upgraded quicker. Same thing with the Necromancer. It always took a long time to get the Vampire Heroes unlocked, and now it'll be much easier. And they lowered the levels that you would need to get all of the different mounts for the Vampire counts, so you can get them at much lower levels now. From the Barded Nightmare, the horse mount, to the winged undead horse mount, to the zombie dragon, corpse cards, all this much lower level. They added some new techs. So Ravenous Dead, I think this is the new, one of these gives them, they don't have the details here, but I know some of them make them minus 100% recruit cost, so they're free. I don't know if they have minus 100% upkeep cost, so I don't know if they're truly free, but they'll be so cheap now, they'll be amazing. And just some changes to their talent trees, or their tech trees in general. So there's some big important ones in here. If we scroll down really quick, there's no way any of you guys want me to read all this, and I've read it all to kind of skim for the very important stuff, and it took me forever, and it was not fun, and most of this is just bugs that never should have been in the game in the first place, but we're all very happy to see them fixed. So this is a big one. Blessed spawnings for Lizardmen now trigger as intended. It ruined their playthroughs. Their Lizardmen Blessed spawnings were basically their regiments of renown, and not being able to get any of them in an entire playthrough, when you should be having all these unique Temple Guard, unique Carnosaurs. You should be able to have all these powerful, unique, different looking models in your Lizardman playthrough, but you couldn't because they wouldn't trigger correctly. And I suffered from that quite a few times. Mazdamundi is one of my favorite lords to play as in the campaign, so this one hurt for me. And Dark Elf loyalty dilemmas now trigger, and they're looking like they're trying to balance it, so that is good. This is another thing that just is a flavorful, important part of their campaigns that just did not work correctly. So I'm happy to see that they are fixed. And these are some of the higher, more priority bugs, I would say. The Tier 3 and Tier 4 Dark Elf Entertainment buildings can now be constructed by those who do not own the Queen and the Crone. So that was something a lot of people were noticing and complaining about, and justly so. Sisters of Slaughter are now recruited from Tier 3 Halls of Ravaging. Good. They lowered, let me just read this here, it's easier to read. Skeleton Warriors and Skeleton Spearmen are now available to recruit from the Infantry Level 1 building Open Graves. So you can get Spearmen for the Vampire counts at Tier 1 buildings, which is strong. Let's see. They changed some of the voiceovers to appropriate genders, so it was kind of a bit of a meme on Reddit for a long time. Some of the things that people say in diplomacy just don't make sense when they say them to each other. Thorgrim's grudge against the undead now applies to Tomb Kings. So Boris Todbringer also can now have a Pegasus, an Imperial Griffin, as well as the Runefang and the White Cloak of Ulrich. So it was a big disappointment in past Empire campaign playthroughs for me when I would finally manage to confederate Boris Todbringer only to find that he doesn't have the ability to get a Griffin mount, and also he did not have his multiplayer item, the White Cloak of Ulrich. And these two items are both rare and very strong for him if you're able to get that and confederate him. He makes a pretty good legendary lord for someone who's not actually playable in the game right now. So a lot of this stuff is just bug fixes, minor changes to certain buildings. A lot of the more recent updates and DLCs, certain other older buildings didn't synergize with those units, didn't provide the correct updates, and they managed to fix that, which is good because they desperately needed it. And I'm just going to skim through here. A lot of these are just broken skills, broken quest lines, things that we're all very happy that they fixed. I'm sure they had quite the list of things needing to be fixed. Lots of issues. I'm looking for anything super important. Killer of the Tormentor will no longer stand in a T-pose on the campaign map. Another thing people were making fun of. Lots of typos fixed as well. Okay. So this is an important one for me and any of the people who want to do tournament play or just host games between players. They added a new host spectator mode to multiplayer battles. So now a spectator can set up a game. They themselves will be the spectator in a specific spectator slot. The other two people will be able to join, and you won't have to do all the shenanigans you had to do before, where you had to hurry up and close positions and stuff so people couldn't join, which was ridiculous. And the host will have visibility over all the armies. You know, as someone who, my dream is to kind of do the tournaments that a lot of the other YouTubers do, this is huge. I mean, this is what people in the community needed in order for this to work better. So we'll be able to go over army compositions before the start of the battles. We won't have to, you know, put up our own little pictures as image blockers to prevent stream sniping and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm so happy. I'm so happy they changed this. The Borrow Legion, the Heinrich Himmler's faction, has been added to the custom battles, so you can play as them if you want. And a lot of this stuff here is also, this is important as well. Okay, so the AI will now use Realm of Souls Ushabti and Menace from Below on non-range artillery units. So that's a nice change. Before, they would just summon them directly on top of your artillery. It was super predictable, which could be good. But if you weren't ready for it, it would destroy your artillery. So seeing that they're going to maybe vary up where they summon these guys is nice. And hopefully they finally fix this. Reduced likelihood of artillery marching towards greenskin and high elf towers when given an attack order. So this is something I experienced a lot in my playthroughs. You know, you're doing a siege battle, you click on your cannons or what have you to attack a tower, and instead of shooting, your cannons just start walking towards the wall. So it was infuriating because that's basically all a cannon is good for in these types of battles. Let's see. A lot of units had trouble with their siege attacker icons. Courage was added to the Goblin Great Shaman, which they needed. That makes sense that they would have that buff. So they fixed the fireball bug, being able to cast free fireballs with no cooldown. That was fun in my Archaon campaign, where I was just able to spam fireballs, but it shouldn't be so. I also ended up getting the, what's it called? The Ring of Ruby Red Ring, or Ring of Ruin, or something like that, where he gets free fireballs. So his natural fireball plus that, I was just casting like a ridiculous amount of fireballs and mowing dudes down. So that was fun. Sad to see it go, but it needed to get fixed for sure. More bugs, more bugs. These are a lot of visual bugs, a lot of glitching and weird like weapon shuffling and things that were happening. Yeah, I'm glad they fixed that. Nothing takes you out of the immersion of a beautiful game like Warhammer 2, like seeing weird graphical glitches or zooming in on your Lothern Sea Guard to see them not correctly pulling their shields out and stuff. It just ruins it for you. So these audio changes are pretty sweet, and basically they just added more voice lines for a lot of these units, a lot of these factions rather. And what that means is, and I think they've already kind of confirmed what this means, it's that, you know, in the times in the game where you zoom in on your units or you click on them, they'll say something. Um, I guess they gave them new, cooler voice lines, and they already did do it quite a bit, but they could get a bit repetitive. So having more variation for the things that they can say will make the game feel more alive. And these are the type of changes that I think are easy to go unappreciated. But you know, the next time you zoom in on some Bugman's Rangers or you know some Slayers or something, and they say something really badass, this is the change you have to thank for that. Checking to make sure we don't miss anything important. Just a lot of good audio changes. Okay, so here's the character and unit balancing, and let's see how much we have to go through here. And I think this will be it once this is done. Okay, and the rest of that is spells and things being balanced, which is important for multiplayer especially. So this is looking like a good hour-and-a-half long video. I hope you guys are enjoying this, and it's not just a bore for you. So let's get into the Beastman. Malagor, plus 400 mass, 1 run speed, 100 multiplayer cost, making him more expensive in multiplayer. I understand that. He's a little too cheap right now. The mass means he won't be able to get knocked down as easily, but also giving him 10 melee attack, 10 melee defense, 10 AP damage, and 10 melee damage, or 15 melee damage. They're making him much better in melee, which is interesting because he is a caster lord. Gorbel was given plus 200 mass. We saw the effectiveness of that in the more recent tournaments. The Gorbel is more competitive when he's not being thrown around. Him being thrown by a large unit decreases his DPS output substantially. So him being able to now stand and fight against something large is good. I mean, it was ridiculous before. Even something large but not technically huge like a dragon, something small like a treekin or something could knock over a Gorbel and send them flying. So yeah, that's not the case anymore. And no terrain penalties in shallow water makes sense. They're a large unit. And they just have a less chance to be staggered. I think this is what this is saying. 10 armor for Kazrak on his Razorgore chariot. More mass for Morgar, makes sense. Feral Manticores minus 100 cost. And I think that's multiplayer as well as campaign. So that's good. They need a little help, especially once they got Frenzy. They needed the minus 100 cost. I think that's good. Goreherd Duels, minus 50 multiplayer cost. And Minotaurs in general just getting cheaper across the board. I like that. Their cost was really prohibitive for bringing them in multiplayer. And I'm hoping that when it's not designated as multiplayer only, it means for campaign and multiplayer. Because I think this would be fine for multiplayer to have cheaper Minotaurs. Razorgore Herds, minus 50%. I think that's good as well. They're another unit that is underutilized. And this is a good change to, I think, all the giants. I see here as well the same thing. Plus 35 AP melee damage. Good, just more armor piercing versus the infantry that they want to be fighting. Plus 15 base melee damage, that's fine. And then plus 1 splash attack from max targets. And this is something, kind of a hidden stat, I don't think people know too much about. But a giant will slam down into the ground, send tons of dudes flying, but they only hurt a certain specific number of those units. Some of them are just flown, which is good because they're not doing damage while they're flying through the air, but they're not actually hurt. So maybe of the 15 units that went flying, only 6 were actually hurt, had the giant's weapon strength and that damage done spread across all those targets. But now adding one more target should allow for the giant to do a good bit more damage in melee. And I like that because the giants are also an underutilized uh, unit in all rosters that they appear in, and they're honestly relatively cheap and nearly unbreakable. So I'm actually surprised they don't get used more. Dwarves, Belegar is a little bit cheaper. I like that. Rune Lord's a little more expensive. I like that. People just opt to take the Rune Lord because they're so cost effective with so many good abilities that making them a bit more expensive will perhaps decrease the amount of spam people are able to do with the Rune Lords. Gromendel, cheaper. I like that. He seemed way too expensive for what he does. I never really understood why he was so expensive. Thorgrim, a little bit cheaper. I like that as well. Thanes have more melee defense, making them more viable. A stripped down Thane is pretty cheap in multiplayer. I usually like to bring one, just as an extra hero unit. -2 health per entity on the Bugman's Rangers. A little bit of a nerf to them. Their regeneration makes them very effective. Maybe a little too effective. I can agree with that. And the hammers and the peak gate guard, which are also hammers, getting more health. Again, we've been seeing the hammers getting slowly buffed over the years, and that's because they started off underwhelming, and hopefully this is another little push in the right direction, making them more useful than, let's say, just always taking iron breakers or the long beards with great weapons. And this is a huge change, which I love. Gyro bombers and skyhammers. So the skyhammer is like my favorite regiment of renown in the game, and giving these plus 200 health and way more ammo, I think it was a super necessary buff. They will never get picked in multiplayer unless they keep getting buffs like this. This is great, but it still may not even be enough to make them viable. They almost need slightly better melee stats to allow them to deal with like a unit, let's say, of Fellbats, something like that. So for right now, a 350 gold unit can tie down an extremely expensive unit like the Skyhammer. And that just feels bad. It almost needs a way to defend itself in the air to make it more viable. Quarreler's getting a little bit of melee defense on the Great Weapon variant is nice as well. So Greenskins here. Scarson gets more mass. He needed it. Grimgor, 600 mass. So nobody's throwing Grimgor around anymore. He's going to stand and bang with anybody he fights. I would be very curious to see if this means that you can't knock Grimgor down. 600 seems like I watched the Gore Bulls in the tournament with their plus 200 mass increase. This is 3 times that much. I feel like you're not going to be able to knock him down at all. You might be able to stagger him out of his attack animations. Let's say if you're hitting him with Kolek or something huge, but I don't think you can knock him down. More armor, more melee defense, so he's even bigger and better than he was before. I like that. Added Encourage, we talked about that. Cheaper Goblin Archers. Good. More health for the squig herds. That's good. So a little buffs to the squig herds, making them more useful. Orc Boar Chariots, plus 4 melee attack. Solid. They needed that. Right now they just feel a bit weak compared to most other chariot units. And this is something that always perplexed me. I thought that the Orc Boar Boys Big'uns used to actually have the bonus versus large, and at some point maybe they changed it, removed it, or if it was just the maybe just my imagination. But with the standard orcs, the designation of bigger and harder meant that they had a bonus versus large. And yeah, I played some Savage Orcs recently on multiplayer, and I was kind of shocked to see that they didn't have the bonus versus large, because I was throwing them in against large targets, and while they do have good armor piercing, they did not have the bonus versus large, and I was kind of confused why they were doing so little damage. So nice to see that. -2 charge bonus is negligible on those guys with their huge charge bonuses already. Same thing with the giants. Better giants. I like it. So Royal Outdwarf Griffites, the Regiment of Renown, Halberd Griffite units. They plus 50% cost, but they have more health per entity. Charge bonus is negligible. The more health is fascinating. I don't know how much they have currently, but they did recently change them to have more models per unit. So plus 8 health may not be a huge number, but it's spread out over more models. So this could be great at preventing things like Fata Buna from nuking them. And it's on all of these Demigryph Knights, so that's pretty solid. And more melee defense on the Lance versions, I think, is warranted. No one takes these guys, but they are beastly. They're cheaper than the Halberd variant, but they're not as good against large. So, Hellblaster volley guns and Hellstorm rocket batteries are now cheaper in multiplayer. I think that's a great buff to them. The units themselves are solid, they just need to be a little bit cheaper to be a little bit more competitive. Captains are 50 cheaper. They were already dirt cheap. So now you almost have no reason not to take a captain mixed into your front line to help buff your state troops and give you that extra leadership cushion. Crossbowmen minus 25%. I think that's necessary. They cost more right now than some super elite archers and other factions, and that's a little ridiculous. They're the lowest tier ranged unit for the Empire. Pistoliers get a bigger charge bonus, more melee attack, so a bit better in melee for them. Witch Hunter, minus 10 ammo. I don't think they had an oppressive amount of ammo to begin with, but maybe they did. I'd have to go back and look. But now, once they're out of ammo, you get into melee, and you're going to have to rely on their melee stats to get some value out of them in the late games. Feels like my voice is going. I've been talking forever. Great swords, more leadership. Halberdiers, more leadership. That's a good change. They are your kind of elite front line. Spearmen with no shields get better bonus versus large. Makes sense. They're not holding shields. They should do more damage. Tanks are getting a bonus versus infantry. More AP melee damage. So they'll be scarier in melee versus infantry. That's a good change. It's a good buff to them. This is basically nothing. And more accuracy for the Great Cannon. So that makes a lot of sense. Every other faction right now has super high accuracy on their cannons and bolt throwers and things. It didn't make sense for the Empire to have some really wonky cannons when everyone else was very accurate. More mass for Malekith on foot. Cheaper Sorceress mount and the cold one. Much cheaper War Hydra. I love this. I love these types of buffs. Once again, I hope it's to multiplayer as well, because this is a unit that never gets picked, and anything that makes units more competitive I like. So minus 50 for the Chill of Sontar, plus more bonus versus large for the Charybdis. Even more of a distinction with the War Hydra. I like that, really distinguishing them from each other. Feral Manticores, okay. So the Supreme Sorceress, the Lord variant, has been very cheap, very cost effective, so they're nerfing her by increasing the cost of her mounts. Another nerf to the Doomfire Warlocks. I don't think this cost increase was necessary, because they already nerfed them by changing their ability to cast once they drop below 50% HP. So increasing their cost by 100 I don't think was quite necessary. They never felt as oppressive to me as perhaps they felt to other people in multiplayer. And I think this does apply to multiplayer as well. So some kind of very small changes. Some big changes here to the Dark Elves Cavalry. They took away some of their charge bonus, but gave them much better sustained melee attack and melee defense bonuses. So once they're in melee, they'll do better, but they won't be as powerful on the charge. So, and then Shades just got more health. Nice buff to the Shades, I think. That was a good way to buff them. They don't need any more damage, for the love of God, but making them a bit more survivable versus low tier things like, dire wolves and such. I think that's a nice buff. How much more do we have to get through before my voice just totally cracks? Okay. High Elves, Fireborn cheaper, but at the cost of physical resistance. Same for the Dragon Princes. Silver Helms get more charge bonus. Handmaidens reduce multiplayer cost. I just did a multiplayer gameplay where I took 2 of them. So having minus 100 multiplayer cost for that would have been pretty sweet. And gave them better missiles. So you see here a lot of switches for AP damage versus base damage. And these are just straight buffs. AP damage is better than base damage. And cheaper Regiment of Renowns, the Grey and the Storm Riders. I like to see that, so maybe we'll see them in multiplayer now. Tyrion's more expensive. but he does have much higher armor piercing. So he should be a better duelist versus armored lords. Alario loses 8 melee attack on her eagle. Not sure that was necessary. And Lithanar is more accurate with more projectile penetration. So he'll kill more models every time he shoots, which is great. And I didn't know that these guys didn't have martial prowess before, these chariots. But to compensate, they took their melee defense. So they'll be strong when they're at high health, but once they lose it, they'll be much weaker than they were before. So stronger in the early part of a battle, much weaker in the later part of the battle. Trebuchets for Bretona are cheaper. Albric is cheaper. Damage aura does 20% less damage. This was not necessary, in my opinion. I thought her aura did a fine amount of damage. They already nerfed it by making it so that you had to be in melee for it to do its effect. So nerfing its damage another 20%. I don't think that was quite necessary. She isn't as heavily picked as she used to be in the meta. Bit cheaper for the generic lords and their mount choices. Foot squires, I think this is a fine nerf. 25 multiplayer cost. They are super cost effective. Armor piercing infantry. Green Knight gets a buff to his melee attack and melee defense. Battle Pilgrims super small, and the Holy Wardens, they each get 1 melee defense. No big deal. Here we have some of the bigger changes. The Lizardmen Cold-Blooded now stops Rampage and gives plus 16 leadership. No longer has max uses, but it does remove the stat penalties and healing, so you can't heal with Cold-Blooded anymore. And we've seen that it's actually still very effective in multiplayer. Although the healing was nice for keeping lords alive, it wasn't that good for, routing units and things. And a lot of times newer players would use their charges of cold blood on units that were engaged in combat and thinking that they were going to heal, but really they were kind of screwing themselves over because they were suffering from these stat penalties. And yeah, you were getting healed while you were taking more damage. So I think this is a nice change, and if I have read correctly, this is more in line with the lore behind Cold-Blooded. So Cold One Riders, they all now have the Primal Instincts ability. Bit more expensive, minus 10 charge bonus, but more melee attack, more melee defense, and better AP and better base damage. So they'll do more damage, have better sustainable combat stats. The Horned Ones have less charge bonus, but once again, same thing, more damage. Feral Cold Ones, same thing. Croxagores have better melee damage, more AP, that's good. Skirmishers, Skink Skirmishers do a bit more damage. The Cold One mount for the Sora Scar veterans, minus 100%, or minus 100 multiplayer cost. Ancient Stegodon is cheaper, plus 3 bonus versus infantry. Regular Stegodon, cheaper by 50. Feral Stegodon, cheaper by 50. Still with this bonus versus infantry. Carnosaur has 3 more melee attack. Skink Chief on their mounts are going to be 100 cheaper when they're on their Stegodon mounts. Makes sense. Same thing for the priests. Bastiladon with the Revivification Crystal is now 25 gold cheaper in multiplayer. And Zlak now uses the Ancient Stegodon's weapon strength. I'm not sure if it used the base Stegodons before, but that should be higher. So that should be a buff. And Lord Mazdamundi on his Palanquin now has plus 516 health. That's a nice buff to him. He was too squishy. Same thing for the mage, for all the other Slann mage priests. They needed something, and giving them just raw HP is a nice way to give them a survivability buff. Instead of tweaking melee resistance, missile resistance, and melee defense, and ward saves, and all this stuff, just give them more health. It makes sense. They're like thousands of years old. They're huge. Yeah, just more health. Saurus have more melee defense. Saurus with the spears, rather. The standard Saurus warriors have more melee attack, and the Temple Guard, slightly more elite, having plus 2 health per entity. So that's nice. Vampire count. Strigor Ghoul King on foot, minus 100 multiplayer cost. That's a good buff for him. letting you field much wider vampire counts armies whenever you opt to take him. Helman Gors gets 400 health on his corpse cart. That is awesome. So he's like the slowest lord in the game on a mount, and he could just get burst fired to death. Now he'll be able to survive a bit of that missile damage and make it into the front line for once. I think this is an excellent buff for Helman Gors. Nightmare for the Vampire Lords, they have plus 10 armor, I like that. The Devils of Schwarzhofen, a really cool Regiment of Renown Vargeist unit, plus 2 melee attack. Same for the Vargeist. Terrorgeists have less charge bonus by 2. And Karn Wraiths and Crypt Horrors, plus 2 melee attack, plus 1 melee defense, respectively. And Mortis Engine direct damage aura deals 20% less damage. So they're really nerfing the aura damage draining effects, which I can appreciate, but I didn't feel like they were quite overtuned as they were. But maybe, maybe they have the ability to look at the numbers and they see that they are a little bit too strong. So Warriors of Chaos, Kolek, increased projectile intersection radius. I'm not quite sure what this is referring to. I'm not sure if this is a buff or debuff. Hopefully one of you guys in the comments can let me know. Plus 100 multiplayer cost. I think that's fair. He is super strong for what he does. Archeon is now more expensive by 100, but he has huge AP increase. They took base damage, but this is probably still a net gain for him in terms of weapon strength. 145 versus minus 205 I think is still a net gain. Sigvald has plus 20% missile block chance, 10 armor, and 5 leadership. Huge buffs for Sigvald. He was already strong in my opinion as a foot lord, but this is making him very hard to snipe. Dragon Ogres are 50 cheaper. Feral Manticore is still 100 cheaper. Giants are the same as the other buffs. Swords of Chaos have been given more AP, and Chaos Knights have been given more AP as well. So Wood Elves here. Wildwood Rangers are cheaper. I think that was necessary. Nobody picks them. 50 cheaper in multiplayer. War Dancers, Regiment of Renown, are 50 cheaper as well. The Wardens of Cithril cost 50 more. Not sure that was necessary. The Way Watchers, Regiments of Renown, are now 50 cheaper. That's fine. Minus 1 ammo is fine. I'm not sure why that 1 ammo was relevant. Same thing with Way Watchers. I think they already had a smaller amount of ammo. Perhaps didn't need that. Waystalkers getting a nice buff. 17 melee attack and 3 melee defense with 15 more AP melee damage. So much better in melee, Waystalkers. Treemen are getting more AP, 190 AP with a minus 270 base. Ancient Treemen, kind of the same thing. And Sisters of the Thorn are getting more expensive with less physical resistance. I don't like that. There's something nobody really picked anyway. I picked them in one of my recent games, and I had a lot of fun with them. But the only reason I picked them is because they were actually somewhat cheap, and their physical resistance is really high. Don't know that they needed this. One of these would have been fine. I think both of them is a bit excessive. So we still have a few more things. Norska here. The Feral Mammoth, increased acceleration. Okay. They're faster on the charge, and whenever you need to pull them out there, they're able to speed up quicker. That's good. Minus 1,000 mass. Minus 11 melee attack, minus 30 AP damage, plus 14 bonus versus infantry, plus 40 base melee damage, plus 4 collision attack max targets. Okay, so in my speculation, this is exactly what I thought they had done. 2 collision attack max target cooldown. And I'm assuming this is going to be pretty much across the board for all the mammoths. Yes. Okay. So basically they nerfed them in some ways, but what they really did was buff them. They increased the amount of targets that they're going to be able to charge into. So in the tournaments you saw that the mammoths were able to just kill and do tons of damage once they got into melee blobs, and that's because of this. Their weapon strength is going to be spread out across more targets, and so every time they swing their trunks and their tusks, and they hit a whole bunch of dudes. They're actually hitting them now. So really solid buffs, and this is how they were in the beginning, I believe, when they were first released. So that's nice to see that they're getting their killing power back. Because as it was, they just felt they would get in the melee, and then they were their acceleration was so bad that you just could never pull them out, and they would just die. All mammoth changes, same thing with the Manticores. Famirs with great weapons costing 50 more, that's probably fine. They're very popular in the meta. Skin wolves are getting cheaper. They lost popularity in the meta, so maybe this is a way to bring them back. And some minor melee defense debuffs here to berserkers. Marauder champions with great weapons get more melee defense. Same thing with the Norscan giants, good buff. And it makes sense that these ice frost worms don't do flaming damage. Same thing with the Chill of Sontar. And Marauder hunters with axes increased projectile mass for more knockbacks. Okay, so that's cool. So Skaven, Clan Rat Spearmen. Clan Rats in general are all 25 cheaper. Deathglow Bombardiers and Poison Wind are 50 cheaper, and they have more ammo. Warfire Throwers are 50 cheaper. So this is good. This will encourage more ranged play from the Skaven. So more damage, more AP damage here from the Hell Pit Abomination, and their summons will have Scurry Away and Strengthen Numbers. So they won't just instantly rout, and if they do, they'll come back because they'll be scurrying away quickly. So the Warlord on his Bonebreaker mount will have 400 health. I like that. That's a good buff. Squeak. That's a pretty good name for a Skaven Lord. Queek Headtaker gets 19 bonus versus infantry, solid, and Halberds for the Storm Vermin get +2 melee attack. Tomb King, Screaming Skull Catapult, gets -50 multiplayer cost. I think that's fine. They're kind of garbage tier artillery, so any way you can help them is great for multiplayer. They're very inaccurate is really the issue. Casket of Souls increased their accuracy. That's nice. Same thing with Kotep on his casket. Cetra gets more melee defense on his chariot. The Necrosphinx, the Sphinx of Usef, they get +200 health. I think that was a necessary buff once they took away a lot of the armor and things of the constructs. I think the health is a nice way to balance that. And the Sepulchral Stalkers and the Eyes of the Desert Regiment of Renown variant get +1 melee attack, and their projectiles get +1 melee damage, AP melee damage each. So that's nice. And because my voice is going, guys, I'm going to kind of go through this silently. Hopefully you don't mind. And see if there's anything worth going into. It's a lot of small changes. Okay, this is huge. Shield of the Old Ones replaced 44% magic resistance with a 22% ward save. This is huge. So this is an ability I never took in multiplayer, and it's something that I'll probably take now on Lord Mazdamundi. Ward save is so much better than magic resistance. There was synergy where you would pop this and then drop a banishment on your own troops, and they wouldn't take a ton of damage. But ward save is just going to make your front line much tankier. Flamestorm brings units to them. That's pretty nice as well for vortex spells. I'm wondering if all vortexes do that. They nerf Lance Formation. So Regrowth no longer has the physical resistance, which is a shame. That's pretty huge. It does give increased vigor. Well, that's kind of bad. A lot of the targets, when I think of Regrowth, I think of units that like Grail Knights, and they already have perfect vigor. So yeah, it sucks to see the physical resistance removed. And it seems like they're probably going to make it cheaper because of that. Ballistics calibration for the dwarves is getting its cooldown reduced. I like that a lot. It'll make the engineers more viable. Wah needed a nerf, I feel, so 26 to 20 melee attack is fine with me. It was a little too strong right now. And let's see. Before my voice goes out completely, Heart of Avalorn now goes off when Tyrion is below 20% HP. I think that's fine. That'll prevent him from being one-shotted by like some Wart Lightning cannons. When he goes below 10% HP, he can still be one-shotted, but at 20% he cannot. Okay, so Transformation of Kadan. This will be more effective now. 40% slower. They did seem like they died too quickly, and making it cheaper will make it more efficient to use. Good at taking out artillery. You summon these guys, they fly straight to the back line, and you feel nothing sacrificing them because they're essentially just winds of magic. Lots of reduced costs. I like to see that. Okay, guys, and that's going to be it. Hopefully, you were able to. Let me kind of I can slowly scroll through. Hopefully, you were able to see if I missed anything important. And if you needed to pause this and check it out yourself, that's something you can certainly do. Just want to make sure you guys get to see it all. But hopefully you enjoyed me walking through the changes. And if you like this video, please like it. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I will be doing campaign playthroughs and more multiplayer stuff, of course. My dream is to have a big YouTube channel centered around Total War Warhammer. Probably my favorite game in recent years. So I can see myself playing it well beyond the release of the third Warhammer game. And if you're looking for someone to provide you with steady content like that, then I'm your guy. So guys, if you noticed any big changes that I missed, go ahead and leave a comment down below and we can talk about it, because I'd be very interested to see. Some people care about different things, and some people see balance changes, differently. I thought all of these changes were very reasonable. Most of this is buffs to kind of fight back the power creep, and the few nerfs I think that were implemented were around mostly multiplayer, the meta, and I think that's fine. So I just would be interested to hear you guys' opinions on this. And without any further ado, guys, that's going to be it for me today. My name is Brett. My channel is Good Talk Gaming, and I will look forward to seeing you on my channel. And as always, guys, I will see you in the next one. Take it easy.